Thank you very much. Welcome again. And today's presentation is about ghost segments in a Sengwer noun. And our presenter is Federico Falletti. And Federico is a PhD student in the University of Edinburgh. His PhD project focuses on the different aspects of the grammar of Sengwer, a South Nilotic language in Kenya. In cooperation with the Sengweri community, Federico has created the first Sengweri dictionary, which can be accessed via Living Dictionary app. Federico, please.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for coming to the presentation. Today I'm going to talk about ghost segments in Sengwer. This is a phenomenon that caught my eye while I was writing the dictionary last year. If you're more interested about the dictionary, I can answer some questions at the end of the talk. The Sengwer are an endangered minority language group in Kenya. They live in the highlands of Kenya, and they lead a very simple pastoralist lifestyle. It's about 20,000 people, most of which are over the age of 40, and the language isn't really being passed on to the younger generations. So this is a map of the distribution of the Nilotic languages. Sengwer is part of the South Nilotic group, which is the sort of light brown patch in the middle of the map. And Sengwer is spoken in the small red circle that I've put in the middle of that brown patch. Other languages of this group are Datoga, Omotic, and other Kalenjin languages like Pokot and Nandi and Keyo. So within the South Nilotic language group, Sengwer belongs to the Kalenjin sub-branch. And within that branch, it is currently classified as a Northern Kalenjin variety, together with Marakwet. However, speakers and I don't really agree with this classification, and I've come to believe that Sengwer is probably more related to central Kalenjin varieties like Tugen and Nandi. So what is the phenomenon that I'm going to talk about roughly? So we're going to be talking about morphology and phonology. We're going to be talking a lot about nominal inflection. So nominal inflection in Nilotic languages is notoriously complex. There are a variety of suffixes and processes which make nominal inflection quite difficult to understand and analyze. And Sengwer is no exception. It has tripartite number system, has a tone-based nominative case marking system, and it has a variety of suffixes for number, both singular and plural, demonstrative suffixes, anaphoric suffixes, possessives, etc., etc. So let's see some examples. This is the noun for dagger, chalk. It can be inflected for definiteness, so it gets a definite suffix it, something like the dagger in English. It can be inflected for plural, daggers, with a suffix is, and also it can take demonstrative suffixes like the proximal demonstrative. This would be something like this dagger. So as you can see, this noun ends in a consonant, and the suffixes concatenate very regularly onto the root. If a noun ends in a vowel, on the other hand, we get some Sandhi processes which merge the two vowels, the stem final vowel and the suffix initial vowel. So we get a long vowel in the trumpet, riamput, and trumpets, riampus, and this trumpet, riampuni. However, there are a large number of nouns which follow the pattern of vowel final nouns, but do not have any vowels in their unmarked form and look more like chalk. For example, the word for day, pet, it doesn't have a vowel at the end, but in the definite, it has a long U vowel. Petut. It also has the same U in the plural, petus, and in the demonstrative, the proximal demonstrative. So this looks more like the trumpet type of word and doesn't look very much like the sort of concatenation, easy concatenation that we saw with dagger. And obviously the forms that concatenate regularly are ungrammatical. So pet needs to have this U segment at the end to be grammatical. So you can have forms like petit or petis or petine. Has to be with a U. So it seems that pet simply has a stem final vowel that doesn't appear in the unmarked form and is underlying. When you add any suffix at the end or you do any morphological operation or certain morphological operations that I will talk about, this vowel appears. To have a notation that is a bit more concise than having surface representation and underlying representation, gloss and everything, I'm just writing it using brackets. So the sort of latent element, what I'm calling ghost segment, will be between brackets. So this doesn't mean that it's optional, just means that it has a more restricted distribution than the rest of the stem. So we've seen the word pet, which has a U at the end, but really a ghost segment in Sengwer can be any vowel. It can be an E, for example, for the word for pot, ter. And you can see that that this vowel is there because you get these long vowels between the stem and the suffixes. But it can also be a consonant. For example, the word for buck is que in the unmarked form, but it gets an S in all of its inflected forms. Questa, quesua, quesine. It can also be a CV syllable. So we have here the word for navel has a pa at the end. But in its unmarked form, it would just be heard as surum and nothing else. But then in the definite, we get surumpet, surumpon, surumponi. So what is going on? And what did people think? So in the literature, people have called these segments thematic suffixes or class suffixes or thematic endings. And they've always been treated in passing. Nobody's ever studied them in depth or done any analysis on them. But after having looked at a lot of nouns and their distribution, I propose that this phenomenon be called ghost segment rather than thematic. Before I go into the nitty-gritty, I'll have to introduce a little bit of the Sengwer phonology and morphology so that you can follow my points. So in terms of consonants, Sengwer is very straightforward. It has 4 places of articulation, labial, alveolar, palatal, and velar, has a full set of nasals, a full set of stops, 1 fricative, 1 lateral, 1 trill, and 2 glides. For vowels, it's a 5x5 vowel system with ATR harmony. So you have 2 front high vowels, 2 back high vowels, 2 front mid vowels, 2 back mid vowels, and 2 low vowels. Sengwer also has 3 tones, a high tone like chat or man, a low tone, ket, men, and a falling tone, kat, ko. And these can occur, for the falling tone can occur on both short and long syllables. So the tone-bearing unit is the syllable, vowels, I mean. The ATR harmony system is plus ATR dominant. So it's the plus ATR feature which spreads to the rest of the word. If you add a plus ATR specified morpheme to to a word, the plus ATR feature will spread to all the vowels in that word. So for example, we have the word for painted, ma'alat. If you add a plural suffix, which is specified for plus ATR, the entire word becomes plus ATR. Ma'alatin. And it is ungrammatical to not do this. It's not optional. In terms of morphology, Sengwer has a tripartite number system. So nouns can be unmarked in the singular and marked in the plural, like the word for farm here, which has a plural suffix en. They can be marked in the singular, but not in the plural. Like we have the word for elephant here, which is marked in the singular with the suffix ya, but unmarked in the plural. Or you could have nouns that are both marked in the singular and the plural, like the word for wing, kepepcha. So I'm calling these three categories following Corneli as naturally singular for the first one, naturally plural, and numberless, but there are other ways of calling these. Number marking can happen in a variety of ways. For the singular, it's usually always marked using suffixes. These are some of the most common suffixes, but there are a bunch of others. The plural, on the other hand, is mostly marked with suffixes, but then in some cases, it's marked by changes in length, changes in tone, or changes in ATR specification. But let's say the most common strategy is suffixation, and these are some of the most common suffixes. Nouns can also be marked for definiteness. And definiteness here is more like a realis-irrealis distinction than the distinction that the English makes between the definite and indefinite article. So it's whether the noun is assumed, the referent of the noun is assumed to exist, or if you're talking about the object in general. Like cows eat grass, you're not imagining a specific cow, but if you're talking about the cow eats grass, then you're talking about cows that are visible or known to you, known to exist. The definite is marked differently depending on whether the noun is plural or singular. You have two definite singular suffixes, which are allomorphs, and they derive from an earlier suffix, ita. So you have ta and it in Sengwer, and they derive from a Proto-South Nilotic suffix ita. You have a parallel situation in the plural. You have plural definite suffixes ka and ik, which derive from a previous suffix ika. So we have these three categories of nouns: naturally singular, naturally plural, and numberless. And they can all be inflected for definiteness. So you have a noun like farm, mbar, which can be definite, mbaret, can be plural indefinite, mbaren, and it can be plural definite, mbarenik, and so on for all the other categories. I'm not going to go in depth on this. So going back to the ghost segments, how can we find these ghost segments? So the first thing is to add a definite suffix. It's the easiest way the easiest diagnostic test you can do to find whether a noun has a ghost segment. So we have the noun for pot here. And if we add the suffix it for definiteness, we get teret, which shows that there is a ghost segment because you get a long vowel rather than a simple it at the end. So this form is ungrammatical. It also works for consonant ghost segments, like we saw before. Que becomes questa. It's ungrammatical to say queta. Has to be an S. And the same for the CV syllables that we've seen. It's ungrammatical to say surumta. Has to be surumpet. However, how can we tell which vowel quality which vowel quality the vowel has? Because the coalescence, the Sandhi processes kind of obscure this. You have E plus E, R plus E, and O plus E all yield a long E. So how do we know which of these three forms is correct? Which one is the underlying vowel quality? We cannot tell from the definite suffix. All of them would yield surumpet as a definite form. We have to use other things. We have to use other types of marking. So these are the types of marking can disambiguate between these forms. So we have the nominative marking, which replaces the tone pattern of the noun. For singulars, it applies a low tone on the entire word, and then a high tone on any open syllable with a vowel, any open syllable with a short vowel. So here we have an already low noun, ter, which becomes in the nominative tere, with a high tone on the ghost segment. Another way is using a demonstrative. In this case, I'm using the proximal demonstrative, which simply lengthens the word final vowel, but doesn't change its quality normally. The same works for some consonants. So in some cases, we get the final S in the nominative of que, which becomes ques. And we also get this S in the proximal demonstrative. Yeah, the same works for the CV syllables. They appear in the nominative with the true underlying specification. And they also appear lengthened in the proximal demonstrative. But so why do we need both of these tests? Well, because of speaker variation, depending on whether the speakers have been exposed to a specific noun, they might believe that the noun has or doesn't have a ghost segment, or they might think that it has a different vowel quality. So it's useful to test it with a few different speakers using a few different methods to try and find out what's the most common way of saying the word. So sometimes you get speakers that haven't really heard a pot in the nominative, and so they don't think that the pot has a ghost segment, and they just use a form that doesn't have anything at the end. And for some nouns which have consonants, again, you don't get anything in the nominative. But usually in the definite, you will get a form which reveals whether the ghost segment is there or not. That's very consistent, even though the vowel quality isn't. So that's why this range of diagnostic tests is useful. So far, we've seen ghost segments at the end of roots, but ghost segments can also appear at the end of suffixes. So for example, the word for elephant has a singular suffix ya, which always appears to have a CCV ghost segment. And you can see it in the singular definite, you can see it in the nominative, and you can see it in other inflections as well. And it's consistent. Every time there is a singular suffix ya, it will have this CCV syllable at the end. A similar thing happens in one of the plural suffixes, is, which always appears to have a ya ghost segment, which appears in its inflections. So if you inflect it for definiteness, it will have yek at the end instead of ik. And again, in the nominative, you see it with its underlying vowel quality. Why have they been called thematic suffixes, and why do I not think that they are thematic suffixes? So there is three terms that I have been used in the literature: thematic suffix, class suffix, and thematic ending. As for thematic suffix and class suffix, these refer to something like declension class markers. So morphologically active suffixes which determine the declension paradigm of a noun. But this model predicts that each stem will have a single class marker. This could be dependent on the stem or on a following morpheme like suffix. But in Sengwer, we see often that a noun will have two different ghost segments, one attached to the stem and one attached to a suffix. Like for the word for day, day in its unmarked singular form has a ghost suffix u, and it's in its singular indefinite, plural indefinite form, it has a suffix, a ghost segment ya. So there are two ghost segments happening at the same time, which if we believe in the thematic suffix hypothesis, then it would be two thematic suffixes at the same time, which shouldn't be possible. In addition to this, if they form classes, we would expect segments to appear in more than one instance. But for example, the ghost segment ya only appears after the suffix is. It never appears in any other plural noun. So it's hardly a class. It's tied to this suffix. So you can see three examples of nouns which have a plural, the same plural suffix with different endings and the same ghost segment. If we say that these segments are thematic suffixes, then we have to say that all the other similar endings will also be thematic suffixes. So pet and lenku have the same paradigm. They behave exactly the same. The only difference is that pet doesn't have a vowel in its unmarked form. So thematic suffix doesn't help us distinguish these two behaviors. And this idea of a declension class marker comes from classical languages like Latin and Greek, where it's impossible to separate the root from its suffixes. Like in the first declension of Latin, you have a, which is you cannot separate it. You cannot say that that in its declension, you cannot separate what the suffix of the genitive is from the stem of rose, because of fusional processes, historical processes that have merged the suffixes and the stem. But in Sengwer, even though you have these sandy processes which merge the vowels, it's very clear what is a suffix and what is a root. So positing the declension class isn't really necessary to understand the paradigms. The other term that is used is thematic endings, which Larsen uses, and he explains it as something that happens for phonological reasons to avoid hiatus. So he doesn't think that they are suffixes, but rather that they are epenthetic elements that are inserted to avoid vowel clash. So for example, he gives this example of the word for rat, which has a singular suffix, and when it is inflected for definiteness, it receives a thematic segment, nta. And in theory, this thematic segment is being added to avoid hiatus between ya and it, so that we don't get the hiatus in a sentence like in a word like muriaet. But that is hardly true. Nta creates a hiatus between a and e. It resolves one hiatus and creates another one. And vowel hiatus isn't really a problem elsewhere in the language. You find hiatus being very common, both stem internally and across word boundaries. Like you have here the word to hunt alone, huais, which has two syllables and they're in hiatus. And also the word for oiling, kailo, has a hiatus between two long vowels and is not a problem for speakers. If we don't think that ghost segments are inserted and they're not suffixes, then they shouldn't have a morphological function, and etc. They should always be part of morphemes. But that's not the case. Sometimes we do find ghost segments that have a meaning, have a function. For example, I have here the noun for man, which has a ghost segment R. And we can see this ghost segment appear in the singular definite. If the ghost wasn't there, we would expect something like murenit, but we get murenet. In the plural, on the other hand, we get a different tone pattern, and we don't get any ghost segment after it. The suffix, the plural definite suffix, concatenates predictably to the root for man, and a word shape that has a ghost segment would be ungrammatical. So this means that the only difference really between the singular and the plural unmarked form of man is that the former has a ghost segment. So this ghost segment is giving the singular meaning to the word. And you can see this very clearly in the nominative, where the ghost segment appears unchanged, aside from the tone. And this is very, very common across the board. So you find that you have singular and plural pairs where the singular has where they don't vary at all, or they vary only in tone, and the singular will have a ghost suffix and the plural will have nothing. The opposite is also possible. You have tree, which has no ghost in the singular, but has a ghost in the plural. And you can also get words like bat, which have a ghost singular suffix and a plural non-ghost suffix. So some of these ghosts can be suffixes in their own right. If we start thinking of ghost segments in these terms, then a lot of the unexpected alternations that we see between singulars and plurals, which have been called irregular, actually start making sense. So I have here the example of the word for cheek, matañ, which in the plural changes ATR specification, but doesn't change in tone or length. And if we apply the diagnostic tests, we see that it actually has a ghost segment, E, which is specified for plus ATR, and hence changes the plus ATR, the ATR specification of the rest of the word. Another example is the word tongue, ngeliep. Again, it gets the same suffix, which has the same effect. It changes the tone, changes the ATR specification, and also changes the length. And this is extremely regular. We find that every time there is an E ghost suffix, it lengthens the previous syllable, it changes the ATR specification and changes the tone to low, 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 and then high. There's also other types, not only E. We get the pair for bird and birds, which has a ghost suffix both in the singular and the plural. And the plural suffix changes the ATR specification. So out of the 2,304 nouns that I looked at, both singular and plural, sometimes more than one plural, sometimes more than one singular, more than half, 59%, had a ghost segment. So it's extremely common in the grammar of Sengwer. And these ghost segments are common across Kalenjin. So all Kalenjin languages have the same phenomenon. In Sengwer, they can be, as we have seen V, CV, C, and CCV. So a single vowel, an open syllable with a short vowel, a single consonant, or a coda plus a CV syllable. So I have some examples here again. So we have lol for bag. We have beehive, just to show you a bit more different shapes of nouns, which has a CV syllable. We have foreleg, which has an S, a consonant. And we have the singular suffix ya, which has a CCV ghost segment. V and CV shapes are the most common. C only occurs in about 8 nouns, and they're all very, very common nouns, which are used, they're very frequent in conversation, and they often have irregular inflection. And CCV only occurs in one case after the singular suffix yo or ya. So what is a ghost segment? What is the definition of ghost segment? So I'm taking this definition from Lindsay 2019. Ghosts are phonological elements, whether consonants, vowels, features, or moras, that surface or delete in phonologically predictable contexts. So this kind of fits with what I've been showing you, what this phenomenon looks like. But it's hard to say what exactly is the trigger for their deletion. It's clear when they appear, but it's not clear why they're deleted in the first place. The same word shapes are common, after all. It's not that every stem final syllable gets deleted, or every open syllable gets deleted stem finally. That's not the case. But the fact that all Kalenjin languages have this makes me think that it's something that happened at least in Proto-Kalenjin. And there's more evidence that this is more of a historical process. Datoga and a lot of the Teso-Turkana languages also have some sort of deletion of word final vowels, which are either deleted completely or they're whispered or murmured. Dimendal in 2012 says the Kalenjin system of thematic vowels, which he puts in inverted commas, presents the end result of the kind of alternation still found synchronically in neighboring Teso-Turkana languages. So rather than a synchronic phenomenon like the ghosts that Lindsay talks about, it seems that ghost segments in Sengwer are a diachronic phenomenon. There are some other observations that we can make looking at different Kalenjin dialects. Vowel ghosts are very common throughout, but consonant ghosts are not so common and only occur in some varieties, in central Kalenjin in particular. So here I'm comparing Sengwer, which is considered northern Kalenjin, but I think it's more like central Kalenjin, and Endo, which is a Marakwet dialect of northern Kalenjin. So Sengwer has a consonant ghost in the word for person, chi, but Endo does not. And if we look at the word for elephant again, we see that in Sengwer, the CCV sequence is deleted, but in Endo, only the CV sequence is deleted. So again, we have this final C that has been taken away in the unmarked form in Sengwer, but not in Endo. So these deletion or ghostification processes must have happened at separate times in the history of Sengwer, or in the history of Kalenjin. It's hard to know exactly what the trigger was and why these processes happened and why they happened sporadically and not throughout the entire lexicon, without having a comparative study of South Nilotic, which includes ghost segments rather than relegate them to a weird suffix phenomenon that doesn't involve the stem. However, I can make some considerations on this phenomenon historically. So all four shapes, V, CV, C, and CCV, can be reduced to two deletion events. One must have been an earlier and regular process, which deleted stem final short vowels in open syllables, like we see in Datoga and we see in Teso-Turkana languages. And then a later, more irregular process, which deleted stem final consonants only in high frequency morphemes, like we've seen the singular suffix, or the word for person and the word for buck, which are very common in the vocabulary of Sengwer. CV ghosts only disappeared because of a constraint against complex coders. If we're going to delete the vowel in the word for beehive, we cannot leave a complex coda at the end of the stem. It's not allowed in any Nilotic language to have this. So you have to delete it. as well in order for it to be grammatical. And CCV ghosts are just the result of the two deletion processes. First, the CV deletion, and then the subsequent C deletion. So you had a word like pelionda, then it became pelion, and then in Sengwer only, but not in endo, for example, you get to pelio without final N. So in order to fit this phenomenon with the definition that Lindsay gave, we just have to add a small sentence. Ghosts of phonological elements that surface or delete in phonologically predictable contexts, either as the result of an active synchronic process or a lexically specified diachronic change. So we include both things, something that happened it's happening synchronically, or something that happened diachronically. So in conclusion, I've described the shape, behavior, and distribution of ghost segments in Sengwer nouns, and these can be part of a root, part of a suffix, or they can be whole suffixes which are morphologically active. I demonstrated that these are diachronically elided ghost segments rather than inserted declension class suffixes or epenthetic forms to avoid hiatus. Further research could focus on other ghost segments which are found in verbs and adjectives, could look at tone patterns more closely, and how and whether they influenced the deletion of ghost segments. And the most important thing, I think, is to reevaluate, improve, and expand on the Proto-Kalenjin, and then South-Nilotic, and then Nilotic reconstructions. Because if we think that these ghost segments were part of the stem, then the reconstructions by Rotland are missing something. So we have here the word for hare, barren cow, and meat, which in Rotland's Proto-South Nilotic reconstruction end in a consonant. But if we look at Sengwer, we have a final vowel, which has become a ghost. And in Datoga, we get a long vowel, which suggests that in their primary form, they have a final vowel again. The stem has a final vowel. So the more accurate reconstructions would be something like this, where these nouns have their final vowel. And you can also see that there are similar tone patterns, or rather not similar, but corresponding tone patterns between them. If the noun in Sengwer is low, in Datoga is fully high. If the noun in Sengwer has a falling tone, in Datoga it will be low. So I've put here tone pattern 1, tone pattern 2. So this is something that I might focus on later on. And that's it.
Thank you, Federico, for this nice talk. We welcome questions, and if there are people participating online, you can you can ask your questions via chat, or you can raise up your hand, and then we allow you to talk. Yes, we had a hand raised by Kessling.
Roland. Yes, thank you, Federico, for sorting this out for us. We have been discussing some of these things, and it's very stimulating to see to what point you have driven this. There are many parallels to Datoga, and I was just trying to check the last examples that you gave on the previous slide for revising Rotland's reconstructions with different vowel endings. Well, I could partly support this because in Datoga you would have this check to simply look at what you call indefinite forms, or was it realis forms that you I would call it non-specific in Datoga, but in most of these, that would be the diagnostic form in Datoga to identify these ghost segments, which are vowels in Datoga only. I was trying to check whether I have, you give the Datoga slot gives Bodega, Sonoda, and Baniega, which are the definite forms or the specific forms. But in this case, the diagnostic ones would be the non-specific, and was checking whether I could find, whether I have the non-specific forms, but it doesn't seem, well, yes, I have it for meat, which would be Bani. So there's a ghost E in the end, for example.
So again, yeah, I didn't have the non-specific forms. So I was hoping that you'd say this, because I know that the specific forms are not as good to use as a diagnostic, but I just didn't have them available. But yes, so the word for meat, for example, has a vowel at the end. So the vowel should be reconstructed for the Proto-South Nilotic.
Yeah, but unfortunately it's E in Datoga, not R. We would have wanted an R. And
yeah, we would have wanted an R, but things are messier than I'm showing here, obviously.
Sorry, these are details. And if I may add another one, which pertains to the only instance that I could find for a ghost consonant, that was probably the preceding slide you had with the word for person, with the ch appearing. You would have a Datoga parallel here as well, because the definite form or the specific form for person would be sida, but there's an cognate segment of this ch, which is s in Datoga, that would appear in the form cc for person. I don't remember what it was, whether it was the non-specific form or the proximal demonstrative, but there's an S, there's a similar process there. So you find all types of parallels here, but the devil is in the details, I think.
The devil is in the details, yes.
Yes, thank you. Bon?
Hi, thanks. I find this very convincing about the ghost segments, and thanks for giving a ghostly talk during our Halloween month here. I know one of my questions was going to be whether you did find a tone as a ghost, not segment, but a super segment, but you did mention that's a subject for future research. In addition to tone, you might see whether just simply the ATR feature might occur as a ghost. And sort of on this topic, you might want to look at oh, and by the way, I did put a link to your living dictionary in the chat. Nick Raleigh and Florian Leone have a paper on phantom structure. So things like an ATR feature or a tone, the association may differ. That you might have an underlying association that doesn't appear in the realization, that sort of thing. It's just some more tools, things for you to think about. And then my question, I'm just really interested in the misclassification of Sengwer, and if you want to talk about that a little bit more, I'd love to hear about that. And yeah, how did that happen, that misclassification?
Yeah. Okay, so that's like 4 questions, but I'll try my best. So the first question was on tone. So I deleted a slide on tone because I thought it was just too much to cover. But yes, you do find contrast in tone in the ghost segments. So for example, here we have the word ter for pot, and then we have a singular definite with a high tone. The suffix it has a high tone. So the only possible tone specification that the ghost segment could have or could have had is a low tone. It couldn't have been a high tone because that word shape is only for nominative. And it couldn't have been a falling tone because otherwise we would get a falling tone on the definiteness syllable. So we would get teret rather than teret. So that suggests that there is a low tone there. And then there are words which are low, and then we get a falling tone, where in teret we get a high tone. So there is a contrast in tone, at least for those words which are low, and then they have a ghost segment. But the majority, or not the majority, but a lot of other words, we cannot say that there is a contrast. The contrast is lost if it was there. About floating ATR and floating tone, it doesn't seem to be there at all in Sengwer. If there is a float, if there is any change in the stem, that is an ATR specification change or a length change or a tone change, there is always an associated ghost segment that triggers it. So there is no floating features. There's only floating, well, floating, not really floating, but segments, full segments on the line. But I'll be, yeah, super interested to read phantom structures. That sounds very fun. And then how did this happen? So this is the classification by Di Stefano. It's the most recent one and the one that Glottolog uses. Sengwer has two names. Sengwer, which is the sort of traditional name, and then it has a name that is associated with the location that the Sengwer live in, which is Cherangan. And Cherangan has been used by a subgroup of the Sengwer, and has also been used by the rest of the Sengwer to describe who they are in relation to where they live. So that creates one confusion, because there are other Kalenjin groups which live in Cherangan and which have traditionally used this Cherangan name to refer to themselves. And that group is the Marakwet. So if you ask a Marakwet now who they are, they would never say Cherangan. At the time that Di Stefano and Rotland made their classifications, a Marakwet speaker might have as well said, oh, I'm a Cherangan, I come from Cherangan, even though they are not Sengwer. I think that is probably why there was this confusion in classification. It's to do with nomenclature and understanding the context of where people live and what names they use to refer to themselves. There is also a political aspect to the whole thing. So the Sengwer are a smaller subgroup, and the Marakwet are quite a big subgroup. Often, if you ask a Marakwet speaker, are the Sengwer, who are the Sengwer? They will say they're a subtribe of the Marakwet. This is not true. It's just convenient for them to include them under their own group for votes or for resource allocation, but it's not really who they are or who they are linguistically. And then there are more recent developments on the nomenclature, which I'm not going to get into now.
If I can ask from your dictionary, I can see different words with the same meaning. For example, arcade and akai. For arcade is graze or lisha in Swahili, and akai is head or lisha. And they both come from pastoralism or agriculture. What is behind this?
Behind being in a rush, I guess, and putting words through some translators, and as in people translators, who went through my translations in English and gave Swahili translations which they thought were accurate. And some of these people were Sengwer speakers, some of them were not Sengwer speakers. So that, yeah, there are a few items which in the Swahili have the same translation, but in English and in Sengwer they will have different translations. It is a work in progress, the online version. So yeah, I will try and fix that.
I thought maybe it's the tone that is in place, maybe if they are differentiated by tone or something like that, because you have another site for a cook for you and kwe for you.
Yeah, those are dialectal distinctions. So you have people in the west of the Sengwer speaking area which use akuk, and people in the east that use akwek. So yeah, there are some dialect distinctions even within Sengwer. There are three main dialects that speakers recognize, and each of those has some very small differences.
Yes, Martin, can you proceed?
Thank you, Federico, for this careful analysis. And I think it's in all the languages in Northeast and East Africa, we Cushitic and Nilotic, we have similar issues. I've never been happy, for example, with terminal vowels in Cushitic, where you also don't know, okay, what is it? Is it part of the root or not? I don't know. I have the feeling that I'm not completely happy with ghost in the ghost segments and with your redefinition. The redefinition, because you have both synchronic and diachronic parts of that redefinition, and I think it's important to have your synchronic analysis, where to me ghost is less attractive, because I want to know whether you see it as, well, for part of the phenomena as a root allomorph or not, or when you have suffix as an allomorph suffix or not. And I think you do. But then I find the term ghost possibly taking away from that analysis. And then yes, you see that people have different ways of coping with these problems. Like if you compare Andrew's grammar of Gorvav with mine on Iraku, the differences there are not in the language, but mainly whether you would see the final vowel as a suffix, whether you have a complex system of primary and secondary suffixes and regularize that. That's also another way to go about it, or whether you go less abstract and keep the distinctions in the root, as I would do. So I'm happy with the care in which you did the analysis, but I would be happier if you separate the diachrony and the synchrony, which are both, I mean, the diachrony is of course an important factor, but I wouldn't want to mix them, because this is also, the reanalysis is why we see probably that it is not so easy to know what the final vowel was in Kalenjin or Proto-Sinaitic.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe ghost segment isn't entirely satisfactory. It was just the best that I could come up with, I guess. But definitely the processes, the diachronic process and the synchronic process are different things. But the phenomenon as a whole sort of fits into the ghost definition quite nicely, I thought. But yeah, I'm willing to reconsider.
Yeah, what I don't like about that is that you that you don't know whether you have a strict synchronic analysis anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this was very, very quickly discussed. The synchronic analysis, I guess, is that the speakers store a different form underlyingly, and they have
two roots. Yeah,
they have two roots in their head, or they have a part of a root which they know to delete. It's like a weakened form of that segment. And this is very similar. I excluded the comparisons, but it's very similar to phenomena in French and Catalan, for example, where you have only consonants in Catalan and French, which get deleted word finally and then appear when the right phonological environment occurs. Yeah, it's a process that happened historically. Historically, French had those consonants word finally, and then there is a synchronic process, which is, you have to know, okay, this word has a T at the end whenever it precedes a vowel. Yeah, those processes are separate, but they're obviously tightly linked. One is sort of like the historical consequence of the other one. But yeah, and Catalan is very similar, but even more similar to Sengwer in where you have a word like kiss, for example, pato, which has no consonant at the end. But if you add any morphology onto the word kiss, for example, you pluralize it, you get an N. Pato, patons. Or you can do carré, the word for street. You add any suffix, and you get, for example, carrero. You get an extra A that appears. And these have been deleted diachronically. They're not there anymore. They were there at some point, but now when words enter the language, they don't undergo this process of deletion anymore.
And then I think we have a comment from Josiah. It's highly possible that one root could have a ghost vowel for diachronic reasons, and then similar roots could be analogized based on the definite or plural forms of the original word?
Yes, Josiah, yes, absolutely. It's very possible. Even more possible, I think, is that the quality of the ghost segments gets analogized. So in a past form, like we have seen for the word for meat, the most common ghost segment is the low vowel, both plus or minus ATR. So most speakers, when they are asked to produce a nominative, they will give it a low vowel. Then maybe you ask them in a different context and they will give you another vowel. But their default is to give you a low vowel because that's the most common one. And it also depends on whether you hear that word in a context which has a ghost. For example, the word for buyer, a location mostly, doesn't get the definite, because if it's a location, it doesn't get the definite suffix. And it doesn't appear in the nominative because a buyer is hardly a subject of action. The buyer can break, maybe, but it's a very specific context that you would have the buyer in a nominative case. And so most speakers think that it doesn't have a ghost segment. But older speakers will have will have it with a ghost segment. So yeah, analogy is happening all over the place and trying to regularize the whole thing.
Okay, thank you very much for presentation, Federico, and thank you participants for coming.